The courtroom fell silent as the young woman's voice cracked with desperation. "Release my father, and I will lift you all back on your feet." For a moment, nobody moved. Then it started. A low chuckle from the gallery, spreading like wildfire until the entire courtroom erupted in laughter. The judge's gavel struck repeatedly, but the mockery continued. How could this slip of a girl, barely 25, dressed in clothes that had seen better days, possibly help anyone in this room? The prosecutor smirked. The defense attorney looked away in embarrassment. Even the bailiff couldn't suppress a grin. But Sarah Mitchell didn't flinch. She stood there, tears streaming down her face, staring at her father slumped in the defendant's chair, and she meant every single word. 3 months earlier, Sarah's world had been entirely different. She worked 2 jobs, one as a physical therapist at a community clinic and another as a waitress at an all-night diner, to support her father, Marcus Mitchell, a former construction foreman whose body had betrayed him after a devastating workplace accident. Marcus had been the kind of man who could fix anything, build anything, lift anything. He'd raised Sarah alone after her mother died when she was 7, working himself to the bone to ensure she had every opportunity he never did. He'd put her through college, attending every graduation ceremony with tears in his eyes, proud beyond measure. But the accident changed everything. A faulty scaffold collapsed, sending Marcus plummeting 30 feet. He survived, but his spine didn't escape unscathed. Chronic pain became his constant companion, along with mounting medical bills that consumed their savings like a hungry beast. When the pain medication stopped working, when the doctors began dismissing his suffering as exaggerated, when the insurance company found loopholes to deny coverage, Marcus found himself in an impossible position. That's when David Chen entered their lives, or rather, when desperation led Marcus to his door. David Chen owned a small pharmacy in their neighborhood, the kind of place that had been there for generations, where everyone knew your name and your ailments. He was in his 60s, with kind eyes that crinkled when he smiled and a gentle manner that made people trust him instantly. When Marcus first approached him, explaining his situation, David's heart broke. He'd seen too many people suffer because they couldn't afford the medication they needed. "I'll help you," David had said quietly. "But you must promise me you'll let me do this the right way." What Marcus didn't know was that David had been cutting corners, providing medications without proper prescriptions to those who desperately needed them but couldn't afford doctor visits. It was illegal, yes, but David saw it as a moral obligation. He kept meticulous records of who he helped and why, never profiting beyond covering his costs. To him, it wasn't drug dealing, it was compassion. For months, David provided Marcus with pain medication at cost. Marcus's quality of life improved dramatically. He could sleep again, could hug his daughter without wincing, could imagine a future beyond constant agony. Sarah noticed the change, grateful that her father had found relief, never questioning how he'd managed it. Then came the raid. Federal agents descended on David's pharmacy like a storm, seizing records, medications, and David himself. The investigation revealed dozens of people he'd been helping, including Marcus Mitchell. Suddenly, Marcus wasn't just a patient, he was an accomplice in a federal drug distribution case. The prosecutors painted David as a drug dealer exploiting vulnerable people, and those he'd helped, like Marcus, were portrayed as willing participants in an illegal operation. The trial was a media sensation. "Pharmacist's illegal drug ring exposed," screamed the headlines. Nobody wanted to hear about the grandmother who could finally afford her heart medication, or the veteran whose PTSD nightmares had stopped, or the construction worker who just wanted to live without debilitating pain. All they saw was the law being broken. Sarah watched her father deteriorate rapidly. Without access to his medication, the pain returned with a vengeance. He barely slept, could hardly eat, and the light that had returned to his eyes during those months of relief vanished. Worse still was the shame. Marcus Mitchell had never broken a law in his life, and now he faced potential prison time. The stress was killing him faster than any physical ailment could. The day of sentencing arrived. David Chen stood before the judge, dignified even in defeat. He'd pled guilty, hoping to spare the people he'd helped from harsher consequences. The prosecutor recommended 15 years in federal prison. 15 years for a 63-year-old man whose only crime had been caring too much. Then it was time to address Marcus and the others. Sarah sat in the gallery, watching her father stand with difficulty, his face gray with pain and anguish. The prosecutor argued that everyone who'd accepted David's help should face consequences, fines at minimum, possibly suspended sentences that would leave them with criminal records forever marked. That's when Sarah stood up. "Your Honor, I need to speak." The judge looked surprised. "Miss, this isn't the appropriate time." "Please," Sarah interrupted, her voice breaking. "I need to say something. About my father. About Mr. Chen. About all of this." The judge studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Approach the bench." Sarah walked forward on trembling legs, aware of every eye in the courtroom following her. When she reached the front, she turned to face them all. The judge, the prosecutor, the defense attorneys, the defendants, the gallery filled with reporters and curious onlookers. She looked at her father, saw the fear and love in his eyes, and found her courage. "My father is the best man I've ever known," she began, her voice gaining strength. "He raised me alone, worked multiple jobs, never complained, never asked for anything for himself. When he got hurt, when the pain became unbearable, when the system that was supposed to help him failed completely, he turned to the only person who showed him any kindness, Mr. Chen." She turned to the judge. "David Chen didn't profit from helping my father. He didn't exploit him. He saw a human being in agony and did what he could to ease that suffering. Yes, he broke the law. But he did it because our system is broken, because people like my father fall through the cracks every single day." The prosecutor started to object, but the judge raised a hand, silencing him. Sarah's voice grew more passionate. "You want to punish my father. You want to give him a criminal record, take away what little dignity he has left, maybe even send him to prison where he'll receive no medical care and suffer even more. For what? For trying to survive, for accepting help when he was drowning." Tears flowed freely now, but she didn't wipe them away. "I'm a physical therapist. I've spent the last 3 years working with people in pain, people the system has failed, people who slip between insurance coverage and disability approval, who work their entire lives only to be discarded when they're injured. I see dozens of them every week, and it breaks my heart because I can help so few." She took a deep breath. "So I'm making you an offer. Release my father. Release all these people who did nothing but try to survive. And I will dedicate the next 5 years of my life to helping anyone in this courtroom who needs it. Free physical therapy, pain management techniques, advocacy with insurance companies, connections to resources, whatever I can do to help. I'll lift you back on your feet, every single one of you who needs it." The laughter started then. It began with one of the reporters, spread to the gallery, infected even some of the court officials. The idea seemed absurd. This young woman, clearly struggling herself, offering to save them all. The prosecutor actually rolled his eyes. Someone in the back called out, "What are you, some kind of superhero?" But Sarah didn't back down. She stood there, letting them laugh, and when it finally died down, she spoke again. "Mock me if you want. But I mean every word. Judge, I'm not asking you to ignore the law. I'm asking you to remember why laws exist in the first place, to protect people, to create a just society, to prevent harm. Who was harmed here? My father, who can barely stand without pain. Mrs. Rodriguez, who can finally play with her grandchildren. Mr. Williams, who stopped having nightmares for the first time in 20 years. The only harm I see is what we're about to do to these people in the name of justice." The judge leaned back in his chair, studying Sarah with an intensity that made her want to look away, but she held his gaze. "Miss Mitchell," he said slowly, "that's quite an offer. But I'm curious, how exactly do you plan to fulfill this promise? You're one person. You work 2 jobs. You have your own responsibilities." "I'll figure it out," Sarah said simply. "I always do, but I can't figure out how to live with myself if I don't try." Mr. Chen tried. He risked everything to help people. The least I can do is the same. The courtroom had gone completely silent now. No more laughter, no more smirking. Something had shifted in the air. The judge looked at David Chen. "Mr. Chen, did you know Miss Mitchell was going to do this?" David shook his head, tears streaming down his face. "I've never met her before today." Then something extraordinary happened. A man in the gallery stood up. He was well dressed, probably in his 50s, with the bearing of someone successful and confident. Your Honor, I'm Robert Harrison. I'm one of the jurors who convicted Mr. Chen. His voice wavered slightly. I've been sitting here listening to Miss Mitchell, and I need to say something. The judge frowned. Mr. Harrison, this is highly irregular. I know, sir, but I can't stay silent. Robert took a breath. I voted to convict because the law was clearly broken. But Miss Mitchell is right. We forgot to ask why. We forgot to ask who was actually harmed. My mother died 5 years ago because she couldn't afford her medications. She rationed her insulin to make it last longer. If someone like David Chen had been there for her, maybe she'd still be alive. He looked at Sarah. You asked who you could help. I have resources. I own a medical supply company. If you're serious about this, I'll donate equipment, supplies, whatever you need. Another person stood up, a woman in her 40s. I'm Jennifer Walsh. I'm a nurse at County General. What Miss Mitchell is describing, helping people navigate the system, providing care to those who fall through the cracks, that's what we desperately need. If she's really doing this, I'll volunteer my time. Then another person stood, and another. A lawyer offering pro bono work to help people appeal insurance denials. A businessman offering to fund a small clinic. A physical therapist offering to join Sarah's effort. Within minutes, a dozen people were standing, offering resources, time, expertise. The prosecutor looked stunned. The defense attorney was openly weeping. Even the bailiff seemed moved. Sarah stood, frozen, unable to process what was happening. She'd expected mockery, dismissal, maybe contempt. Instead, something impossible was unfolding before her eyes. The judge banged his gavel, but gently this time. Order. Please, everyone, sit down. He waited until the courtroom settled, then looked at Sarah for a long moment. Miss Mitchell, in 23 years on this bench, I've never seen anything quite like this. You came here expecting to sacrifice yourself for your father. Instead, you've reminded everyone in this room why we became lawyers, judges, healthcare providers in the first place, to help people, to create a better world. He paused, gathering his thoughts. Mr. Chen broke the law. That's a fact I cannot ignore. However, the law also gives me discretion in sentencing, and circumstances matter. He looked at David. Mr. Chen, I'm sentencing you to 5 years probation, during which you will work with Miss Mitchell's initiative, whatever form it takes, to help create legitimate pathways for people to access affordable healthcare. You will use your expertise as a pharmacist to educate, to advocate, to make real change within the law. He turned to Marcus and the others. As for you, Mr. Mitchell, and the rest of the defendants, I'm dismissing all charges. You are victims of a broken system, not criminals. Go home. The courtroom erupted. Marcus nearly collapsed, saved only by Sarah rushing to catch him. David Chen stood motionless, unable to believe what he'd just heard. The prosecutor started to object, then stopped, looking at the faces around him, and slowly sat back down. But the judge wasn't finished. He looked at everyone who had stood to offer help. As for the rest of you, I'm going to hold you to those offers. Miss Mitchell walked in here with nothing but conviction and love for her father. You've pledged your resources and time. I'm going to personally follow up to ensure this initiative actually happens. This courtroom broke something today with its mockery, so we're damn well going to fix something too. 6 months later, the Mitchell Community Health Initiative operated out of a donated storefront in the same neighborhood where David Chen's pharmacy had stood. Sarah worked there 3 days a week, providing physical therapy and pain management counseling. David Chen, still on probation, ran educational workshops on medication management and advocated for policy changes. Jennifer Walsh coordinated a rotating team of volunteer nurses and doctors. Robert Harrison had furnished the entire clinic with state-of-the-art equipment. Marcus Mitchell served as the clinic's patient advocate, using his experience to help others navigate insurance claims and disability applications. The chronic pain was still there, it always would be, but now he had legitimate access to pain management, and more importantly, he had purpose again. The clinic served over 300 people in its first 6 months. Local news covered the story, not as a scandal this time, but as an example of what community could accomplish. Other cities reached out, wanting to replicate the model. The prosecutor who had sought harsh sentences quietly donated to the initiative, never seeking credit. On the 6-month anniversary, Sarah stood in the clinic as the sun set, watching Marcus help an elderly veteran fill out paperwork. David Chen was teaching a class in the next room. Through the window, she could see the line of people waiting for tomorrow's appointments, people who had nowhere else to turn, who were falling through the cracks, who just needed someone to care. She thought about that day in the courtroom, about the laughter that had felt like knives, about the desperation that had driven her to make an impossible promise. She thought about all the people who had stood up, who had transformed mockery into something miraculous. The clinic's phone rang. It was another volunteer calling, another resource being offered, another person wanting to help. Sarah answered with a smile, ready to lift one more person back on their feet. Sometimes the most impossible promises become the most important ones to keep. Sometimes a single act of desperate love can crack open a cynical world just enough to let the light back in. And sometimes, when the system breaks people down, it takes just one person refusing to accept that brokenness to remind everyone else of their own humanity. Sarah Mitchell had walked into that courtroom expecting to sacrifice everything for her father. Instead, she'd accidentally built a movement, proven that kindness could be stronger than mockery, and reminded a room full of strangers that beneath their roles and titles, they were all just humans who wanted to help. The laughter had stopped the moment the impossible began to happen. And it never started again.